financial institutions. But he's also a teacher at the University of Hong Kong as an adjunct professor, and until 2020 he was managing director and chief risk officer for Natixis in Asia Pacific. In that capacity, he's responsible for market, credit, and operational risk management for the whole of Asia Pacific. He has 35 years of experience in senior management positions as an economist in front office, risk operations, finance functions, commercial investment banks, as well as hedge funds in Europe and Asia. Previously employed by JP Morgan, UPS, which I think is the largest Swiss bank, Credit Suisse, CLSA, and Nomura, which is Japanese. He studied mathematics, economics, and business administration, and completed his studies with a Master of Arts degree from University of Zurich and a Master of Science from the University of London. Now, with all that economic experience, it's going to be a waste if we don't discuss what's happening in China, but we'll come to that. First of all, I would very much like to discuss with you your life and lifestyle and experiences in Hong Kong, which is where you've been for many years, from what happened in 2019, how that affected you, and what is happening now. And someone just said, he's German. You're not German. So welcome to the show, Christoph from Switzerland, who's living in Hong Kong. Tell us about your 2019 experience, and from there, and after that, we'll talk about the economy.
Sure. Well, I don't have a particular insight into the events that are the riots in Hong Kong. So all I can do is I can tell you my personal impressions and experience from that country. So what it was is really juvenile gangs terrorizing the population under the guidance of presumably U.S. agents provocateurs and agents. That's pretty obvious when you were here. And it was a bad experience. It was really bad. So my office at the time was on the Kowloon side, and I lived on Hong Kong Island. So every morning and every evening I had to cross the harbour, the cross harbour tunnel, from home to work, and back in the evening from the office to home. And it was so bad that on 3 days in the evening I could not get back home because all the cross-harbor tunnels were closed because the demonstrators were throwing stones at cars, and no taxi ever dared use these cross-harbor tunnels. The MTR, the subway, was closed because the subway stations were trashed, were burning. So we literally were stuck. There was no way you could get a taxi because all the taxis were dividing. So I had to stay overnight in a hotel 3 times because I just couldn't get home. And this was a really scary experience because the streets were literally in flames. So you had rioters literally terrorizing the population. And against all reports that came out, the population was actually not supporting these juvenile gangs at all. In particular, on Sundays, I witnessed huge demonstrations in Central supporting the police, people waving little Chinese flags supporting the police. And that was always on Sundays because these people were professionals, so during the work week they have to work. And on Monday to Friday, Saturday, it was up to the rioters because they were either unemployed or students or school kids, whereas the site had to work. And it was really scary, but the population was actually supporting largely the police. The police stations were under siege 24 hours. So every morning I was then training for a marathon, and so every morning before going to work at 5 o'clock in the morning I went on a run, and that run took me past the North Point police stations, which was under heavy siege. 24 hours you had demonstrators camping outside of the police station, and the police was barricading off at the entrance to the police station. And I don't know what they were doing there. They were just camping out. They were violent at that time, at least in my house. But the police was barricading it. Now I know from friends and relatives of friends, the population was actually supporting the police because they organized trips to the police stations to deliver water, fresh fruits, snacks, just to support the police. Now they did that not openly because you were, as I said, you were subject to being terrorized by these juvenile gangs. So, but there was I had the impression there was a real strong support for the police, not openly, but behind the scene. Now, one day he came back from a funeral on the countryside, managed to get a taxi. The taxi was able to, get through the barricades, bring us close to where we lived inside our home, drop us off, and I saw these barricades. I really want to know what's going on. So I decided to go out and what we in the military used to call do some armed reconnaissance. That means you go out and you provoke them a little bit, see how they react.
So we should just point out here that you are actually military trained.
Oh yes, I used to be a battalion commander in the military. Right. So against the advice of my wife, I went out and exposed myself to this, went out into the street and saw these barricades in the street. Nobody, just the barricades, railing in the streets, stones in the street, obstacles. I said, okay, let's remove these barricades and start removing these railings away into the side. And suddenly, people joined me.
Did you not feel a sense of danger doing that?
No.
Okay.
No. Well, it was a bit, I was a little bit nervous, you don't know what's going to happen, but if they want to, first of all, I'm a foreigner, so they think twice before they attack me. Secondly, I know how to fight back, so I can hurt them. I may go down, but I can hurt them, I can hurt them bad.
You're a big guy, yeah.
So I started removing 3 or 4 people from the street, started joining me and helping me carry these things away. And then suddenly from the side came a young man dressed in black and approached me and said, "Excuse me, sir, but if I were you, I wouldn't do that. The demonstrators are 10 minutes away and you might get hurt. Right? And okay, let them come and let's see what happens." And I said, "Well, your decision." And went back and sat down on the curb. And I continued to remove these obstacles. And they came. They came walking. Kids, really teenagers, students. They looked at me and I continued. You think they didn't do anything? The people who helped me, they disappeared. Right? They were Chinese, the whole company. So at some point there's no point because they don't react. So my armed reconnaissance didn't really yield any results. And there's
It did yield a result. I think you basically effectively found out that they were afraid of you. More afraid of you than you were of them.
They were afraid of me. No.
Hammer has asked this question, how old were they? A guesstimate on how old they were.
They were, I would estimate between 12 and 16.
Oh, really? That young?
Yeah. So I approached 2 girls, okay, who were sort of walking together and said, "Why are you here? What are you demonstrating for?" And they said, "Well, our friends at school said if you come, they will give you $200 or $300 if you come and walk with us."
Hong Kong dollars?
Hong Kong dollars.
Right.
And that's why we came, to join our classmates and get a bit of pocket money. Okay, well, but did you get paid? And I said, "No, unfortunately not." And they asked me, "Where do I get the money?"
Well, they thought you might give them the money.
Yes, they thought maybe I would pay them. No, sorry. In that case, what the other girl said, "Well, in that case, you probably go home." Okay, fine. So I walked around to another side street, actually to the place in front of the Saigon Hall and the R station, where only shot was fired the entire police engagement. Not while I was there, but on another occasion. Where one lonely policeman was surrounded by rioters and brought his pistol and probably by accident hurt one protester. That was the only shot that was fired at the only time police used the gun. Yeah, this one. So I went to this place and there became barricades. And then I started realizing there are different types of demonstrators. First of all, there were the kids, like the two girls, two school girls that I met. They just stayed to get a bit of pocket money and because the classmates were there and invited them. Now, why don't you join us? These were the ones. And then there are the ones who were sort of the I would say, the intelligence people who did the intelligence, like the guy who warned me. He was there to look, where is the police? What's happening? And then he would phone or communicate with the organizers. And there were organizers who directly demonstrated. And I saw them. These were rather athletic young men in their 20s or late 20s with a baseball cap and a mask. Right. Now, these people, they directed, and I saw them, receiving a message, police is coming from this side, move over there. They were really directing the demonstrations. They actually had lookouts. Oh, yeah. They had lookouts, and they had organizers and people who directed the crowd, and then you had the chief who was walking with the crowd. So, and it was very, yeah, forget it. This was very, very obvious, and from a military experience, this was well organized, well structured, with a clear command structure, with communication. You know, whatever.
Have you been involved in protests, riots, or anything like that before in formal life?
Well, I have seen when I was working for a French bank, I was in Paris, and I had the yellow vest.
All right.
Paris. And I experienced the autonomous movement in Zurich, which was very, very violent when I was still. And nothing I mean, I've never seen a police force which was so restrained and so disciplined like the police. I've seen police walking by, not from a close distance, but I saw them from afar, and they held out these banners saying, "Be careful, we're going to deploy tear gas." Where on earth do you find a police force which is warning the rioters, "Be careful, we're going to throw tear gas"?
Yeah.
So,
I have an expression that I use for the Chinese police, and let's be honest, Hong Kongese police are very authoritarian, and you must do what you're told. The way I describe it in China is that the Chinese police manage our behavior. Foreign police profit from our misbehavior. And that's the best way I can describe the differences between, I used to be a police officer, so I've got some idea of how police officers work in the West. And now I have a fairly good idea of how police officers work here in China through my own observations, not through my personal experiences in interacting with them. Because the only time I interact with a police officer is when they're usually around the neighborhood. "Hello, Jerry," they know who I am. There's no problem with that.
Yeah, exactly. And Hong Kong police, honestly, every now and then I saw the police in the street getting ready to getting deployed when the riot started coming out. So every now and then we'll go to the police, young police officers, and they could see they were nervous. But they were not hard-boiled policemen, they were really, really nervous. So I told them, I think you're doing a great job and we appreciate your service, thank you for your service. And they were really, really grateful for being supported, somebody in particular, foreign coming and telling them that. So that was good. So, and then suddenly something interesting, two things now to mention. One thing is, as I say, all the police stations in Hong Kong were under siege. The one place that was not under siege was the PLA barracks, which are plump middle in central. Right? And they were never touched in any way. There were no paroles sprayed on the walls. There were no lace pointers directed at the guards. There were no stones thrown. Not that I see anything. So somebody must have said this is off limit, and it was inspected. I never saw anything happening to the PLA barracks, and I passed them on the way to work and on the way back. I could make it. So that was an interesting observation.
That really is interesting. But the other thing about the PLA is they didn't come out to join in, except for one reason.
Yeah, to clean up the sleeves. In short sleeve t-shirts, unarmed, they started cleaning up the sleeves from the barricade. Very, very smart move by the FBI.
Yes, I think it was. What was the second observation?
The second observation, one day, I had an agreement with a taxi driver. Because you don't know what's happening overnight, because you can take the FDR or the taxi agreement with the taxi driver, who would pick me up from home every morning at 7 o'clock. He would come and I would take the taxi to the airport express from where I would take the FDR. So I passed on the way, there was always, every morning you saw the police and the barricades, everything, the regular police. And one day, they were different policies. They were different. They were not the usual uniform Hong Kong police. They were not in uniform. They only had a vest which says police, but they really looked very, very athletic, very muscular. Shortcut, almost bold. And you could see how they were directing the other policemen. So I don't know where they came from. And that was the day that the whole thing ended. In one day, it was finished.
Right. Well, I suspect they may be what we call here, we have a nickname for them. We see them in China. We call them the Kevlar cops.
Okay.
There's a very good reason for that, because they are very well geared up. It's quite rare that you don't see them on a day-to-day basis. But every now and then, for example, where was I yesterday? Yesterday, I walked down to our riverfront with my wife. We walked out, and we had something to bite to eat down on the riverfront. And because it's a Sunday evening, and because Zhongshan, and you know this, Zhongshan is absolutely packed full of Hong Kongers and Shenzheners at the moment.
Oh, yes.
To experience our food and our shopping, and basically for someone come from Hong Kong or Shenzhen now, it's a 1 hour drive and you're in the center of Zhongshan because of the new link. Because of that, the local shopping center, which is along the riverfront, had a lot of activities and entertainment going on. And I saw the Kevlar cops walk through, and there were 6 of them in a row. And they're very well equipped. They don't look like stormtroopers, but they do look like business. They look like they know what they're doing.
I don't know exactly what you mean. In my case, I saw they weren't wearing any Kevlar, no equipment at all. Just one vest which says police. That's it. Otherwise, short sleeve shirt, very casual. But they have to change.
The Kevlar is the cap, but they one our ones they wear like a little like an army helmet. And that's the nearest thing that you get to any kind of oppressive view from them. They're wearing a normal uniform, but they've got the utility belts with all the bits.
Oh, yes. I've seen them.
I don't think they were armed, but they sometimes are. So we call them the Kevlar cops. We treat them seriously.
They are the armed police.
Yes.
The armed police.
Yeah, they're called the People's Liberation Army Police, PLPC. They're a branch of the military.
Exactly. Well, I suspect these people started showing up, and the whole thing collapsed. And
I wonder if they did come from the mainland. You mentioned right at the very beginning, and I wrote a little note here, that you said it was obvious there was outside influence.
yeah.
And is the evidence that you have for that, is that the fact that kids were saying we're going to get paid for it, or is there more than that?
Well, look, not in my personal experience. As I said, I have no particular insight, so I cannot really comment the pictures of employees of the U.S. Embassy conferring with rioters at the lobby of the Marriott Hotel. And you have the teachers, which are people who masquerade as teachers, like Mr. Adrian, Riker, all these people who in the meantime disappeared.
Yes. Yeah, they're in Thailand now. At least some of them were in Thailand.
Yeah, I think I heard Riker in Thailand.
Yeah.
Probably next target. Do I have personal experience? Or no, I don't. I just see what other people say and what has been published in terms of video clips. You know, Michael Pillsbury on TV admitting that the U.S. has a hand in the game in Hong Kong. You know, the massive staff of the Hong Kong consulate, of the U.S. consulate in Hong Kong. Are these people doing it? You know, there are all sorts of questions. But personally, I don't have any evidence for that, so I cannot really comment.
Well, never mind about your personal experience. So let's move on about. There are two things that I wanted to talk to you about because you're an economist. The first one only came out today that they have reduced the trade figures and the GDP growth. The target was for 5% GDP growth. In fact, China said about 5%, and it's coming about 5%. And they also have a $100 billion trade surplus. So trade is up, and interestingly, it was up with both Germany and the UK. What's going on?
Good question. Okay, you know, honestly, what people say, you say I'm an economist. Now, I'm an economist by training. I have a master's degree in economics, but I've never worked as an economist. Okay, in my profession, to make that disclaimer. But what people say is that China is trying to export its way out of a weak economic situation. That may be true, but they have some doubts about this. And as you mentioned before this session, you would like to discuss the subject. So I did something which I usually don't do. I watched Bloomberg TV and listened to some of the economists, the real economists, who commented on China. And I listened to that. The impression that I get from listening to these economists is, you know, they always know what's going on, number one. And number two, they always know what China should be doing, right? So they know much better what China should be doing than the people who actually make the decisions in China. Now, the prevailing opinion among the economists is that China is subsidizing production and trying to export its way out of a weak economy. Now, what they should be doing, according to these economists, they should actually subsidize consumption. Now, that's a debate. I cannot comment on it because I trust that the decision makers in China have better insight on what's actually happening inside the economy than economists sitting in London or in New York or in Hong Kong, who first of all don't speak Chinese, have very little understanding of Chinese history. A litmus test, which is always a good one, if you meet an economist commenting on China, ask him whether he's familiar with the Salt and Iron debate in 600 BC, and then look what the answer is. Because there's a very interesting debate which is still heavily influencing Chinese economic policy today, and is one of the first discussions about government intervention into the economy. But this goes back more than 2,000 years, and that's exactly what China has always been doing. They look back into their own history for precedents. What was happening then? China has such a rich history, there is always a precedent on which they can rely and from which they can learn something. And that's, I think, the strength of the Chinese of the government and the Chinese think tanks, of which there are many, 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 that they have the ability to look back, find precedents, and make their decisions about based on their own experience and their own history. You know, I'm not going to repeat all the things that was said on Bloomberg, and the thing is, these economists or these commentators, they always make predictions about China collapsing, China doing this and China doing that. Not just about China, but also about the US. The US failed is going to do this, and they always know. One thing I have learned by more than 35 years experience in financial markets, the future is not predictable. There are just too many factors coming into it. So, you know, what is going to happen to China? I don't know, and nobody really knows. Because there are so many things that can happen between now and 5 years from now, or 4 years from now. Who's going to win the election? What is going to be the impact on Europe, on the US, on China? So many factors coming in. Making a prediction is, you know, it's just a gamble.
It's a crystal ball.
It's a crystal ball. Yeah. So I don't make any predictions. I think that there are people in China, in the think tanks, in the government, who think about these things very hard, and there are lots of them, and they will ultimately make a decision. That decision may be right or wrong, nobody knows at this point in time. It can go right, it can go wrong, and all we can say, let's see what comes up.
Yeah, I think one of the things that China has in its favor is that it's not rigidly stuck to one direction. So what can happen? I mean, currently we've got the third plenary session starting now, and what they will do in there is they will talk about the problems that they have, the challenges that they're facing, the opportunities that they've got, and what's the best direction to take to get them. And a lot of stuff comes out of there, what the West calls the rubber stamp parliament. And what I say, the West has no idea how much work goes on behind that in order to put something up so they can say, yes, that's a good policy, we can do that. So it's already very much debated in the background before it gets there.
Yeah. So, and I'm always, I'm always amazed about the ignorance of many of the commentators, even Nobel Prize winners in economics, that they talk about China. Honestly, have they ever been to China? It comes out, the ignorance of some, not all of them, but some of them, it's scary.
I have a theory on that, and it's just a theory. I've never really delved very deeply into it because I studied workplace culture, and workplace culture and management philosophy are very different things. We have a Western management philosophy and a Chinese workplace culture here. So when you're running an international company here, you look at things differently, and you need people who understand the Chinese workplace culture before you can say, we can understand what direction we need to take. And I think the same thing, that's on a micro level in your own company. It was IBM who discovered this, first of all. A guy working for IBM, Galleposo, discovered this, and he expanded it out to much wider dimensions of culture. And I think you might be right. There's a PhD, there's a Master of Science, there's an economist here. They're all saying the same thing. If I was China, this is what I would do. And China is saying, well, we've got, and we should go back to the salt and iron debate. Because China would say, well, let's go back to the Salt Line debate and look at what happened there and what needed to happen and how that was dealt with. So they're not looking at it like, what's my return on investment? You know, what's the price earnings ratio? All of these things, they're not looking at that. They're looking at what's the benefit to society here. Tell us about this. Tell us about the Salt and Iron, because I heard about this for the first time the other day.
Yeah. Well, that was what we take one point. It's a very interesting subject. Maybe we can cover that in a different context. But when China opened up Deng Xiaoping, there was a debate in China. How do we do that? And there was two schools of thought which were discussed in China, say behind the scene in the government and the think tanks and universities. How do we do that? There were essentially two approaches. One was the approach what we call shock therapy. Shock therapy has its origin in the Chicago School of Economics, which is essentially, in very simple terms, two things. One, you immediately liberalize all the prices. So in a planned economy, you have price controls. You abolish all price controls and let the prices flow one day and another. The second measure you do, you implement a strong austerity policy, meaning you cut down government spending. In a planned economy, it was always the government which was spending the money because it was state-owned enterprises, and you have a shock therapy, liberalize prices one day and another, and immediately cut down government spending. That was the Chicago shock therapy. Now the other school of thought in China was, well, let's think back to the Salt and Iron debate, which also another book called Once, which was the predecessor of that, which is a discussion how should the government interfere in the economy. Should they have free market economy for everything, or are there areas where the government should exercise control? And at the time, two strategic goods, which were of strategic value for the country at the time, was salt and iron. So the one time debate is over iron. They say we have to liberalize everything. It is beneficial for the country if the merchants have control over the price and quantity that is being created in the economy. The other school said gradually let the economy work its own path. Let's keep control over the strategic goods, which were at the time salt and iron. And salt and iron won was the Warren State period, the first debate, which and now when after Mao and Xiaoping before me, that was exactly the debate. And the debate was won by the proponents of not just introduce capitalism, free market, state capitalism, but no, gradually liberate the economy. There's a shock therapy, gradually introduce private economy, and keep all future services. And that model, as we all know, was hugely successful. Look at the growth rate, 15–16%, and hugely successful. Whereas countries which use the shock therapy, as advocated by the World Bank and the IMF, which goes with the economy, like Russia, miserable failure. It was complete chaos. So that's in summary the Salt and Iron debate. There is much more to tell about this, but I think
I'm just going to mention something here. I'm getting some donations put into here, which is great. Thank you very much. I'm having trouble actually writing comments. Believe it or not, the last 3 comments I've written have all come back saying YouTube has rejected your comment. It thinks it is spam. So I said, thank you very much for a donation, and it's spam. So Steve Wheeler, thank you for a fascinating discussion, Steve says. I've got 2 or 3 things like that which have gone off the screen now, but thank you very much. Just so everybody understands this, Christoph and I are actually friends. and we do have dinner together from time to time, and we will share that beer, right? And a couple of bottles of wine, probably. So we'll get there. Now, the real reason why I wanted to talk to you is this. You and I have I wouldn't call this a disagreement. We have a difference of opinion on something. I think that the US dollar is a little bit like a punch-drunk boxer taking his hits, but not yet ready to canvas. You told me the other day that you think it's not as bad as it looks for the US dollar. Yeah, and I would love to get your view on that because I know I'm going to learn something from you because all I know about economics is what people like you tell me.
Okay, look, again, this is an opinion, this is my opinion, and there are lots of people with different opinions, everyone has a right to an opinion. And at the end, I will bring in another discussion, a more rational opinion than mine or somebody else. But, if you look at the news and the comments and the opinions that are floating around about the impending collapse of the US dollar, it is a fact. I mean, it appears that the US are hell-bent to destroy their own financial standing, right? By imposing sanctions and the harebrained idea to seize Russian assets and channel them to the war efforts in Ukraine, and threatening to sanction Chinese banks because China refuses to bend to the will of NATO. That really destroys not just the US financial system, but the global financial infrastructure. It is damaging it. But on the other hand, you see these comments which are, for example, just very recently on Friday, there was an article in the Asian Times which says, and I quote, Michael Yellen's de-dollarization fears will only get worse. Yellen's de-dollarization fears. And it says the dollar suffered a stunning collapse in 2022 in its market share as a reserve currency. I'm just quoting a few comments here. Among other things, it claims that the soaring US national debt approaching 35 trillion is undermining the US dollar dominance. Another news which is sort of floating around a few weeks ago on social media, a shocking proclamation that a 50-year-old agreement between the US and Saudi Arabia to sell oil in US dollar collapsed. Well, that's not true. That agreement never existed.
I made a video about exactly that with Fernando. Yeah.
It never existed in that form. So you have all these fake news and opinion without substantiating why would the soaring US government debt have a negative impact on the US dollar. Where do you see that? Right? So, there are too many questions open which are not explained. It is a fact, though. It is a fact that cannot be, it's not an opinion, it's a fact that the BRICS members turn away from the US dollar and implement bilateral trade settled in their own currency. Yes, that's a fact. China has developed a cross-border interbank payment system called CIPS, which is, I think, right now there are about 142 participants in that payment system. So there is definitely a trend to look for alternatives to the US dollar sector. And it's happening, and it's, the US really forces people to think, wait a minute, they can seize the Russian assets, they can impose sanctions on Venezuela, Iran, China, Russia. What's going to happen to my money? How do I set the payment? So, of course, people start thinking about alternatives, but does it really threaten the dominance of the US dollar? No, I don't think so. Okay. These are efforts and they are there, but in the short and medium term, they're not going to make the US dollar collapse or make it attack the dominance of the US dollar. There are things happening. Okay. So, make an example. The US dollar as a reserve currency between 2001 and 2022, the reserve currency, that's the money that central banks hold in reserve. So the US dollar has declined from 73% to below 60% of central bank currency reserves held by central bank. Now, what does that mean? Is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? Or does it mean anything? Now, the question is, first of all, what are currency reserves? Why do the central banks hold currency reserves in the first place? Well, it's, I have to say, foreign currency economics is one of the most complicated subjects in economics. International economics is a nightmare for every student. I can confirm that. So I make it very, very simple, very, very simplified. What happens when a trade deficit occurs in a country? That means a country imports more than it exports, right? So that means that the demand for foreign currency increases because you need to pay these imports, right? So the demand for foreign currency increases and is higher than the demand for domestic currencies needed to pay for exports. Right? So there is a disbalance. Now what the central banks can do, it can interfere in the foreign exchange market to support its own currency. It can. Some countries have to, like Hong Kong, because the Hong Kong currency is pegged to the US dollar. So they have to maintain that exchange rate of 7.45 Hong Kong dollar to the US dollar. They have to interfere. And if the Hong Kong dollar gets weaker, they have to interfere in the currency market, buy Hong Kong dollar and sell US dollar. So they have to have a currency reserve in US dollar to be able to sell US dollar. That's what the currency reserve really is for.
Is there a reason why they can't unpeg it? And what would be the effect of doing that?
Yeah. For Hong Kong, it's a complex problem for Hong Kong because Hong Kong is a very, very, very small economy. They could, but it would damage the Hong Kong economy quite considerably. It's an interesting question. What is the currency peg good for? I'll come to that maybe a little bit later. For example, Argentina is pegged to the US dollar with disastrous consequences. Why? Because once you change your currency against another currency, you lose your monetary policy authority. The monetary policy is done by someone else. So if Argentina pegs the Argentina peso to the US dollar, the US monetary policy will be the Argentinian monetary policy. They have no, for example, the US. In history, as much as I know, in the entire history of humankind, no country has ever gone bankrupt as long as it has control over its own monetary policy. Argentina went bankrupt because they had no monetary policy, because the currency was pegged to the US dollar. Greece went bankrupt because they have no more monetary policy, because they came to the euro, they have no more currency. So, it's a very, very dangerous game to peg your currency against another currency. For Hong Kong, so far, it has been okay, and they withstood a massive attack on the financial
Soros and some others.
Yeah, exactly. So they have enough muscle and power to fight back, and Soros lost bad in this fight. take a discussion which goes beyond this because as I say, foreign exchange economics is one of the most complex questions to this. So, as I said, central banks hold currency reserves in order to enable them to interfere in the currency market. Now, it is a decision of the central bank what they want to hold in terms of currency and how do they structure their balance sheet. And that's a decision which is based on trade numbers, on trade volumes, on capital account, on many factors. And that's a decision of the respective central banks. And if they decide we trade more with China, so we need more CNY instead of dollar, or we trade more with euro, we need more euro, it has no indication whether the US dollar is collapsing or not. I think that's wrong. That's a wrong conclusion. And also, you have to consider that the US is not as strong economically as it used to be. So the share of the US GDP in percentage of the global GDP is today about 25%. After the Second World War, it was 50%. Okay? So there's a dramatic drop in the GDP contribution of the US. Therefore, you could argue you don't need as much US dollar in your currency reserves because simply the size of the relative size of the US is no longer as big as it used to be. Also, another few indicators such as the share of global trade. The US has significantly less percentage of the global trade than it used to have. So you will need less US dollar in the central bank as a reserve currency. So, these decisions are not necessarily an indication that the US dollar is losing strength or is collapsing or even collapsing. The US dollar will remain a very, very important reserve currency. That's in the short term, that's simply not going to change. So there are indications why the US dollar is a good reserve currency. I come back to that. But let's talk about why the US dollar is a dominant currency for the world, not just as a reserve currency, but as a currency overall. First of all, the US is still the biggest economy in the world. Okay, number one. Number two, the US financial system is the most advanced and most sophisticated financial system in the world. China is nowhere near that, not even Europe or Japan. So, the instruments that are available for professional investors in the US financial system are unmatched anywhere. So, as a result of that, the US dollar is an important currency. Thirdly, according to some estimates, and these are just estimates, about 80% of global trade is denominated in US dollar. 80%. Right? So you cannot just get rid of the US dollar. Right? This is trade outside of the US. So it's not trade with the US, but outside of the US. And thirdly, the global exchange market is concentrated upon a few currencies where the US dollar is dominating. The average turnover per day in US dollar is about 6.6 trillion. So you're going to think about, our brain is not able to imagine that number, 6.6 trillion, up 14% from 2019. And these are foreign exchange transactions, which may partly trade related or partly just financial transactions. Because when we talk about trade, we talk about real goods changing hands and being paid. But the large part of the US dollar, which is being traded in the currency market, is financial transactions, like international loans, international investments, project finance, So, as I said, the share of the US dollar in global trade is about 10%, and has deteriorated considerably. Global GDP about 25%. But the US dollar as currency in cross-border loans is around 50%. All cross-border loans are denominated 50% in US dollar. As I said, FX transaction volume is about 80% market. Trade invoicing 50%. SWIFT payment. SWIFT is the system, computer system where you move dollars and currencies around, is close to 50%. So you can see a large part of the foreign exchange transactions are denominated in dollar. Why? Because there is no alternative. The US financial market is huge, is sophisticated, and the depth of the US dollar market is enormous. No other currency in which you can move billions of dollars within the fraction of a second without damaging the currency. So imagine in 2018, China, which is a huge state-owned crisis, acquired a Swiss company called Syngenta. It's a company which produced and still produces fungicide, pesticide, fertilizer. The acquisition price was $50 billion. 50 billion. How are you going to pay for that?
If you look at US dollars.
No bank will finance that transaction area than so important currency market in the world. That there is no alternative. If it was always here, when the euro was introduced, well, that's the case of the US dollar. Euro will take over and become the dominant currency in Japan. In the 70s, people said Japanese yen will push the dollar out, it will become the dominant currency. So it's very unlikely that in the short term there is going to be a replacement currency which can replace the US dollar in financial transactions. Another example is, let's say, the project finances $10 billion. Are you going to finance that in Mongolian I think is the one.
So even though the currency in Mongolia.
The international banks for such transactions, that side, that largely as they
So really that's keeping the US dollar. What we see on the surface with things like the debt, the military spending, the reserves reducing, and everything that we see makes it look pretty worldwide observers or certainly have that the US dollar is strong. I can see it being much stronger. It's not in good. Or is it?
well, I think, we have debated the US economy collapsing. I come back to an argument which I initially mentioned in this argument, which says, that the soaring US debt, approaching 35 billion, is going to kill the US dollar. Now let's think about that. The thing is, and Paul Jail today actually said he is concerned about the US dollar debt, the government debt, US dollar. Janet Yellen is concerned. Are they concerned by something that says about de-dollarization? He needs our investors confidence. So I don't think that's the case. Because if that was the case, something going to happen. Thank you.
So, hello.
You have to pay between 9 and 10% in an environment where the government in the States, for instance, or something like has a view on what's happening to the dollar. And let's explore what the market thinks. You may think the dollar is a construct of system. I think it's not strong enough and will remain strong. But what does the market actually think? Where the money, the real money is heading? And there is a very interesting indicator which I really like a lot. And that indicator is called the CDS spread. CDS stands for credit default swap. And it's a derivative, a financial derivative instrument. What does it do? It's in fact an insurance policy. I'm concerned, Trump has been shown that the US is going to collapse. But I'm not comfortable with the debt that I have. I want insurance. So I go to a bank and say, I would like to insure my debt. So that the government cannot pay me back, I need insurance. And that should still be a CDS. That CDS means that when the US government defaults, meaning they cannot pay me back, all the taxes they can pay me instead. That's in theory. No, in reality, that's actually great.
Okay, so my view would be that if the US government can't afford to pay me back, then Goldman Sachs can't afford it either.
Well, that's a question. That's a different question. But see, Goldman Sachs actually sells CDS. Any bank does. So, of course, that's not free. I have to pay an insurance premium.